Testing, testing, testing. There we go. We got some sound now. All right. Well, first off, I just want to welcome everybody to our third quarter Talk of the Town. I'm Kevin Cole. I'm your mayor here in our great city. And I just want to tell you what a privilege and an honor it is to be your mayor. This is a great place to be. And the reason it's so awesome is really and truly because of you, the people. That's what makes our city really, I think, some of the best and the best place to be around is because of the people that are here. We're a diverse city, incredibly diverse from east to west and those kind of things. And I want to talk a little bit about east versus west for just a second, right? You're in, what's the name of this place? Anybody got what's the name of the building we're in? West Side Event Center, right? No, we changed the name. West Pearland Community Center. Notice the subtle change there. Number one, it really isn't an event center. Event center is more bigger, grander, those types of things. It's really a community center where the neighborhoods around here can come and have events, small events, and community-related types of things. But here's the other thing. We took the word side out of it. Same thing with, we had a library over here in a rent space. In fact, it was a drop-off point here. For several years, and then we had the lease space next to HEB, and it was the West Side Library. When we built the new library over in Shadow Creek Parkway, we had to, put a new sign up, West Pearland Library. Okay. As I ran for office in 2020, I really wanted, and in 2 or 3 years before that, really trained myself in using the words and not using the word side. Not east side, not west side. What do sides do? Divides us. One side of the fence or the other, one side of the tracks or the other, one side of the road or the other. It's us versus them. Well, that's not the case. We have an east end and a west end, and everything in between is connected, right? You might have a railroad track, you might have a freeway, you might have a roadway, but we're connected. And so it's real important to me that we do that. In fact, when I was on the trail, the other two opponents, every time they would say side, I would say, okay, I need a swear jar. Because every time you use the word side, I'm going to fine you. And what was funny is over time, they actually changed what they said. They would say side and then they would back up and go, I mean the west end. And they started changing their vernacular. So we're starting to do that here locally as well. We're all one community. We're all one city. City of Pearland is east versus west. I might live by Pearland High School and you might live by the library over here. We might be separated by 8 miles, but guess what? We're a neighbor, right? We're all neighbors. We're all in this city together. So I want to welcome you to this. This particular Talk of the Town, in fact, had a great couple over here just asked me, they said, when do I do this? Do I do this very often? And the answer is yes, we do this once a quarter, okay? We take the Talk of the Town on the road. When I ran for election, I wanted to make sure that we were connecting with people in their neighborhood. When you come to City Hall itself, at the end of the day, it's an office building, right? That's all it is. But what does it represent? It represents the seat of our local government. That's where city manager, myself, city council, that's where we do our business. If you want to come and talk to us, you got to come in front of a city council meeting. That meeting is set up. It's a business meeting. You've got the dais, you've got the chairs. It's intimidating. It is. I've spoken to city council before. And even after being there, coming in to speak, it's nerve-wracking, a little nervous. Don't necessarily want to get up and feel that nerve, right? So it's nervous, it's nerve-wracking. It's set up that way, set up as a business meeting. It's not meant to be intimidating, but it just is. So a lot of people don't come and do that. So instead, let's take the confines of our city government out of City Hall, come into your neighborhood right here, and let's talk about relevant issues today. And on your turf, not our turf, where you're more comfortable than we are, right? That's the reason for doing this. We do this every quarter. We do try to publicize these things out so we can draw the right crowd. And the topic is going to change from quarter to quarter. We're going to try to find something that's very relevant to what's going on in our city on that particular quarter and talk about it. At the same time, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. Like your questions tonight. We're going to have a question and answer period after a couple of panel discussions. This is set up. We're going to introduce some of our fine employees here, and we want to hear your questions. We have solicited some questions online, some people who might not have been able to make it here. So we're streaming this so we can answer their questions as well. That's the great thing about technology today. We can, we can answer those questions, but this is also captured in video on our YouTube. And so you can go back and watch it, or you can go back and refer to it. We can go back and refer to it. If somebody asked a question, maybe we didn't answer that question the right way. Maybe we did something, we need to go back and address it. We can go back and, what was the actual question being asked, and we can make sure that we get it right. One of the things we want to do is do everything we can to do it the right way, 100%, transparent and above board. So again, I want to thank you for being here tonight. This is kind of the agenda. I'm going to bring up our new city manager here in just a minute. Trent, why don't you go ahead and start walking this way. We're going to talk a little bit about our FY24 budget. We're in the midst of budget discussions right now. We have about another 5 weeks of budget discussions going on. We're going to take questions and answers, question and answer period from you guys. And then last, we've got a couple of our council members here tonight. And we're going to have a discussion with them about some of our priorities of the city, right? So I do want to introduce Councilmember Tony Carbone right back here. Wait.
Roll with this one while we talk while we work on it.
Let me try this one. I'll just move over so I'm not blinded. And then we have Mr. Rushi Patel right here. He's our newest council member, was elected in May. So we'll get to hear from both of these fine gentlemen here in just a minute. We have somebody that's been more seasoned, been on the council for a few years, as well as our newbie. And we'll get a chance to walk through that. Here we go. Is that working better? There we go. Remember, we want to make sure that people online that are streaming as well as watching this later can hear us. I know you guys can probably hear me in the room, but we want to make sure that we're doing that. So first up, many of you, if you've been around our city for a while, have known Trent. Trent's been part of our city for quite a few years, but back here a few months ago, we officially approved Trent Epperson as our new city manager. So I would like you guys to welcome him up here tonight. So with that, I'm going to ask a couple of questions of Trent, and then we're going to get right into the budget discussion. But Trent, why don't you just give a brief discussion about your track to get to the position where you are now?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, and welcome everybody here tonight. Glad to be here and love being your city manager. So I've been in city government about 22 years and spent the first few years of that in Missouri City, adjacent here. And then in 2006 came over to the city of Pearland. So I've been here as of the 16th of August, so just last week, here 17 years. And first came over and worked with the Capital Projects Group. So a lot of the major roadways, the public safety building, the water and wastewater plants, the big drainage projects that we've seen over the last several years, had responsibility for those. And then subsequent, a few years into it, also started working with the engineering department and public works. And then in about 2015, moved into the city manager's office as the assistant city manager, and started working with the IT department and Parks and Rec as well. And of course, working the capital projects, worked with all the departments across the city. And so, when there was an opportunity here, wanted to take everything I've learned over the years and how much I enjoy this community and love serving this community, and wanted to kind of spend the next few years of that being able to lead our great organization. We got a great organization of men and women that they've got the servant's heart, and they love doing the things for this community that we do to really provide great service and a great community to live, work, and play. And we have several of them here tonight, so thank you guys for being here. And it's a great opportunity. I thank the City Council for having the faith in me and to bring me in as the city manager, and look forward to the next several years of continuing to lead this city and see the great growth and all the great things in our future.
Yeah, and that process is a process, and it's the first time I'd been through the process of hiring a city manager. And so, you have to have faith in the process, and then you have to follow through with that process. And so at every step of the way, Trent was in that upper echelon of people that we saw. We started that process with 42 or 43 applications from around the nation, and culminating in one person. So, when you start off with a pile of resumes and people and names and faces and those types of things, and then you end up with the guy that you've got on your staff. And council does have a lot of faith and trust in Trent. He's off to a great start. We hope many, many things to come. But Trent, as we move forward with the budget discussion, and I'm going to talk about a relevant project that's right here off of 288. As many of you know, we get asked all the time about the 288 improvements. We had the 288 beautification project, the pear sculptures, those kind of things. And people are saying, "Wait a minute, that's my property tax. Why are you using my property taxes to do that? That could go to helping roads, or that could go to help, something else." So Trent, describe a little bit about where the funding source for this and the reasons for doing the 288 beautification project.
Sure. So I'll start off with where it's funded from.
And real quick,
sure.
This is what it looked like before we started.
So the funding source is actually the Pearland Economic Development Corporation. So they have a half-cent sales tax that goes, and that is for economic development and other improvements in the community that benefit economic development. So as you can see from these before pictures, this is what the 288 corridor looked like before the EDC started working to clean the corridor up and improve that corridor. And so, the purpose for that is to create this sense of place where we are different. We know we're different than City of Houston or Manville to our south, to the south, but this really exemplifies what we are. And you know that when you arrived in Pearland, you're in a different place, a place that has higher standards, it has higher expectations. So, we fund the actual construction of everything through the Economic Development Corporation, so that's not part of your property taxes. And then there is a management district along the 288 corridor, which is basically the businesses along that corridor chose to go into a management district that was formed, and then it is they pay taxes that in the long term will maintain this corridor. So we went from basically a corridor that got mowed about 3 times a year by the Texas Department of Transportation, and they never cleaned the trash up or anything like that. We started with cleaning up the trash, starting to mow it, doing the power washing so things look fresh and new, and then eventually came in with the beautification project that's getting close to completion out here today. So much like many other areas in the Houston metro, if you're traveling along one of the major freeways and you hit a pocket of it that's nicely manicured and landscaped and has features, that's typically in a management district as well. So very similar to other areas around the metro, Houston metro area, and how these things are done to really improve the look, feel of your community. And when we bring in new companies and they see that, they understand what the expectation is here and what the vision is for the city. And it's a big recruiting tool for bringing those headquarters here, as well as additional employment base here. If you've been out on to the lower Kirby area recently, so between the Beltway and Shadow Creek Parkway on Kirby, we've got lots of new businesses we've recruited out there, and they look at these things when they come to our community. They don't want to just know where they can build their company, but they want to know where the amenities are. They want to know where's the trail. Can they get the trail system connected to their business? And what is this community going to look like for the long term? And is it different? And this really is part of that, in attracting those companies, making this have a sense of place, and making this a great place to draw those major employers. So we do have not everybody's got to travel to the Med Center or to Houston or elsewhere to work. We've created a place where you can live and work as well as play. So I think that covered
Yeah,
just
it
about
does.
everything
Just
there.
real quick about 288, some of the improvements, and as you're moving through any of our entrances from Houston into Pearland, you see the monument signs, so you know when you're moving from Houston, you're moving into Pearland. We do everything we can to make sure that trash and those types of things are picked up. It drives me nuts when I drive by and I see a napkin, one napkin. Why?
We get the emails, Mayor, about it.
It's out of place, right? It's not supposed to be there. It drives me nuts. But it's funny, real quick story about these entrances. I get the opportunity to interface with other elected officials around the area. So I had lunch and meetings with two Houston council members, one for lunch out here off 288, another one met in our offices. Both of them, when I met with them, the first thing they said was, I get it. I get it. You don't want to look like us. You want to make sure that you're drawing that line in the sand and people know when you're moving from Houston into Pearland. And I said, you got it. People see it. They got it instantly. And so people do see it. And it's not a detriment to Houston or Manville or Missouri City or anybody that we're connected to. We just want to make sure that when you're driving into Pearland, you know you're in a special place. You know you're in a different place. And for the parts that Trent was talking about, it is an attraction tool. Companies who are going to go and invest sometimes $20, $30, $100 million into your community, they want to make sure that their $100 million investment has a return on it, that we're going to make sure that we're maintaining the neighborhood, if you will, before they go do it. Just like when you go buy a home. You go look the neighborhood up, right? You go look around. If people maintaining their properties, what's it going to be like? And big companies do the same thing, just on a different scale. But it's the very same reason for them doing that. So as we go through our budget discussion tonight, there's going to be some QR codes. We have them here. We also have them on a place card right back here in the back. But we're going to kind of talk about some of the different drivers of our budget. We're going to talk about our maintenance and operation, or our general fund budget, and kind of what happens with that. We're going to talk a little bit about our debt side. We have a debt component in our capital improvements projects and what drives that. And then we're going to talk about our enterprise fund, water and sewer, right? And what drives our water rates. So we're going to have that kind of high-level discussion tonight. Budget as a glance. Again, you can follow this QR code. You can do it here. You can do it back on the table. This will take you directly to our website, where everything about our budget is on that website. All of our budget discussions are there. The budget itself, all the books that we go through, are there for you to follow and go through. Josh, are the budget workshop videos on there? Yeah. So you can go back and, like, for example, if you go back to August the 12th, you can go and actually see the rollout of the budget by the staff. You can see it. It's about 2.5, 3 hours long, and you can see the whole budget discussion as it unfolded. All right? Again, as transparent as we can possibly see. So, Trent, in a real, I guess, small time frame here, explain this slide and how our budget is balanced and where our budget was last year versus this year.
Sure. So last year, right after we passed our budget, about a month into the operating year, it was discovered that there was a valuation error in our tax rate calculation. So we immediately had about a $10 million hole in our budget. About half of that on the operating side, and about half of that on our debt service side. So immediately, we kind of had to go into triage mode and determine how we were going to address that, how we could plan for the long term to come out of that, and that resulted in basically providing some one-time funds to get through the last year's budget, and resulted in kind of a deficit operating budget last year. So where we kind of started from this year was from that position, and having to climb out of that, get our heads back above water, and present a budget that is balanced and helps us move forward in the future. So big picture is we went back and we focused on our council strategic priorities. So every February, the council does a strategic retreat, and they take a look at what are the strategic priorities for the city, and then they develop milestones, which are kind of goals that we take take from there moving forward. So some of those strategic priorities are that we have a safe community, that we have resilient finances, and we have sustainable infrastructure. So going into the budget, we really look to those strategic priorities to determine what can we do this year, because coming out of last year, we knew it was going to be a very tight budget, a very difficult budget to put together. And so we just went back to those and looked at what are the priorities and how do we put a budget together. So in the end, we'll go through some of the details of what we were able to add, but in the end, we were able to bring a balanced budget that is very, very flat on the operating side of things. So our expenditures basically stayed flat in a very tough, economic situation with inflation. We asked our departments to put together tight budgets and look at everything that they spent dollars on and try to bring that in as tight as we could. So the result there is that while we had to bring in a lot more revenue based on what happened with the tax valuation from last year, we did hold our expenditures very, very flat to put this budget together while meeting all the minimum balance requirements. So you see, last year we took this down to the very bare minimum reserve policy we have. So we're trying to build that back up as well. And that's part of what we did with this budget as well, getting our days of reserves up a couple of days. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
What's interesting is, because you'll talk about it, but like the days of reserves and those types of things, if we go below those policy limits, can we? We can eat into savings and take it down, but we have a policy that at a minimum it's 90 days. We took it to 90.09. I mean, we took it to, I think we had a penny, to above that. And so, we can, but we go below this, we go below our own policy limits. It starts hitting our credit agencies. It starts hitting our credit, and it starts our viability as an organization. Okay. And so the credit rating agencies and those types of things look at every single bit of this to make sure that we're credit worthy, which means something when we talk about the next phase of this and we start talking about debt. That means you're just like your own, what am I trying to say? Your credit score. If credit score is good, you get better interest rates. Credit score is bad, you get bad rates. We have credit agencies and credit ratings as well. So all of those things have to be looked at under this budget, not just the nickels and pennies, but how it all jives together, making sure that we're looking to the next year and the next year and the next year. It's not just 1 year, we're looking out further than that. But in this budget, we're going to talk a little bit about what's been in the news, right? Legislature just met. They just passed this huge property tax decrease. You'll be voting on that in November. And you'll also be seeing where there's a homestead tax exemption that's out there. So let's talk a little bit about what the legislature did and how or if that impacts what we're doing here with the city, right? So Trent, explain a little bit the homestead, and I'm going to explain this slide a little bit. Explain what the legislature did and the homestead tax exemption and who, where, and how that impacts.
Sure. So what the legislature did is they increased significantly the homestead exemption for the ISD or the school district taxes. So that's something you'll see reflected in your tax bills this coming year. So all what the state did was they increased that, and then they're going to provide additional state funds for the schools to basically backfill that. So they did not make any changes on the city side. So there's not any required or new increase for the city's homestead tax exemption where we're getting any funding from the state to backfill that. So so while there's nothing coming out of the legislature from a city standpoint, it is something we have looked at in the past and are going to continue to look at, and I think that's what the mayor is going to cover with this slide. Yeah.
So if we do anything with our homestead tax exemption on the city side, we have a certain deadline and dates to do that. It has to be done by the end of June because the appraisal district and all that has to start factoring that in. So when the tax rates get set, the bills go out, it can be done. So it has to be done in a timely fashion. We talked about this last year, and I challenged council. I said, look, we don't, because they asked it in the middle of budget, but time's passed. So I said, best time to bring it up is a strategic planning retreat. That's when we start our budget talks. Nobody brought it up. So we moved along through the rest of the year, and all of a sudden there was growing talk about, do we want to do something about the homestead tax exemption? So we actually had a discussion back in June. And when you do a homestead tax exemption, you heard what Trent said. The state is giving the opportunity for school districts to raise their homestead tax exemption to $100,000, but they're going to backfill that missing revenue. It's going to come from the state, which is a good thing. We're getting more money from the state into the school districts. We don't have that opportunity. The state doesn't fund us like they do schools. So when we do something with the homestead tax exemption, it's going to have an impact somewhere, okay? So we had a workshop here, like I said, in early June, and we said, draw the line on revenue neutral. If we're taking in $59 or $57 million in property tax across the line, if we do it here and we're going to do it with a homestead tax exemption, what does that look like? And we've been looking at, we're currently at 2.5%. We looked at if we take it to 5, if we take it to 10, 15, and to 20, what happens? The homeowner, so the tax rate will change because we still have to have the same revenue to meet our expenses and obligations, right? So we still have to have that. And so what happens? While the homeowner might see a flat or just a slight decrease in their tax bill, the non-homestead or businesses, so currently they're paying 9.92% higher than what they would if we didn't have a 2.5% homestead exemption. If we go to 5, it goes up to 10, 10% goes up to 10.6, 15, and 20. So you're shifting that burden over there. Not saying that we won't, not saying that we will, but we need to have an honest discussion about where does that money come from and what does this do. We're talking about trying to, told you. There we go. Told you, never fails. We had the discussion. We'd like to attract more companies to invest, 40, 50, 60, $100 million in our community. And we want to make sure that they're welcome into our community as well. How do we do this? So we're going to have a deeper dive into this discussion starting in October. We're going to get through this budget season because we were right up against the deadline. You don't make this decision overnight. You don't make this decision moving fast. You make it based on data, and we wanted to have a data approach. So we're going to have more conversation about a homestead tax exemption at the city level starting in October. And I've said you're probably not going to see something go from 2.5 to 20 in 1 year. But I could see a 2.5 to 5 or a 2.5 to 7.5, add 5%, and have a game plan to get us to 20 or to 15 or wherever the council decides to fall on over some period of time, rather than go from 2.5 to 20 all at once. Because one of the things that we don't have that's going on in Pearland and in other areas around us now, we don't have the fast, explosive growth that we did years ago. So if you have that growth coming in, it's easier to move to something like this than if you're closer to build out. So our growth rates are slowing. We're still growing. We're just not growing at almost double-digit rates anymore. All right, supplements or things that we've actually added to the budget that's not in the current budget, right? So let's talk a little bit about this. As Trent mentioned, one of our highest priorities is safe community. That is a priority of the council. And as you know, everybody out here, if you're not safe at home, your quality of life is horrible. So we want to make sure that you're safe at home from a criminal element. We want to make sure that your home is safe if you have a fire or something happens to you, that somebody can get to you in a timely fashion. So there's a couple of things. You can see 3 firefighter positions, and it's not going to cost us anything, right? People are going, how do you do that? They can work for free? No. We actually have some part-time positions now that we pay. We're converting those part-time positions into full-time positions on the hours, and it's net neutral. So we're actually gaining full-time positions versus those part-time positions. Police, it's been 2 or 3 years since they've really added positions.
To patrol, yes.
To patrol. So they've kind of been flat, yet we've been growing. We know, we have criminal element coming from Houston and Harris County into Pearland, We know that we deal with some of that. We, and both fire had about 6 positions they wanted to add this year, down to 3. Police had about 6, and we have 2 patrol and a sergeant with a vehicle. So these are adding to our public safety staff. Radio replacement, police radio replacements. Trent, explain that one a little bit, because this is a must because of a change in the system.
Sure. So, the police all have their radio systems, and we're part of the greater Houston area radio system. And so, those radios last about 8 to 10 years. And then usually within those time periods, some of the technology changes. So we've got radios that are basically, you hear about end of life for things that are technology based. They're very technology based as well. So those are nearing end of life. So basically after January 1, 2024, they are no longer going to function the way they're supposed to on the radio system that we work within. So we've got to make a wholesale change to those. We did this recently, last couple of years with the fire department, and so we're making that change with the police department this year. So very important must do that we have to do to keep them operational moving forward.
So go ahead and explain the public safety dispatching study in the course.
Sure. So
smaller line items, but
sure. So the public safety dispatching study, one of the things that the council set forth in front of us as part of our strategic priority of safe community is how do we impact response times for priority 1 calls. Those are your highest priority calls for both fire, police, and EMS. And, how do we impact and reduce that initial response time? And we did some studies several years ago, and, we kind of looked, do we update those studies? What's the best path forward on how we tackle this? And so we got with our fire chief and our police chief and their command staff and said, here's what we heard from council and what they want to look at. How do we move that forward? What's the best way to tackle that and kind of our lowest hanging fruit? And they both came back, and I'll explain a little bit about how we dispatch for fire and police today. So we dispatch at our public safety building. We have dispatchers there that take the 911 calls, and they send out PD when there's a PD call. Since our fire department's fairly new and been growing over, just the last decade that we've had a full-time fire department, that started up with using a dispatching service. So it's somebody that's not sitting in Pearland, they're sitting up on the north side of Houston, and the 911 calls get transferred to them, and they are dispatching our fire department. Well, one of the nuances in that is those come into our dispatch first, our police dispatch. They transfer them over there. Our police dispatcher hangs on the phone to see, okay, it is a fire emergency, it's a medical emergency, but is there something else going on so that we need to dispatch police as well? So they're often, spending their time on those calls or much of those calls as well. Not every call, but there's, some time we're spending on both of those. And so both chiefs said, you want to impact response times, let's look at our dispatching and how we have that set up. And long term, how do we move into a combined dispatching group that works for both the fire and the police department and are here locally? And then we can really start to impact some of those response times. So we've looked at this in the past. It's always a very expensive proposition. We pay a pretty good, it's a pretty good rate per call to work with the dispatching service. So there's equipment you have to bring on. You have to make sure you have the space. Then you have to hire the personnel, and you got to have redundancy in that personnel because that's a 24/7 operation. So it's not just add some stuff and it's minimal increase. There's a pretty significant impact on the budget. So we're going to go through a study to put together basically a business plan on how do we do that over the next several years. What's the most cost-effective way? What's the most efficient way, and how do we do that, implement that successfully? So that's what that's going to look at, and ultimately we're going to wind up with better response times on our priority calls. And then the last one there is a incident management team course. So it's an all hazards incident management team. So of course, when we have any kind of major emergency, whether it be a hurricane, whether it be a winter storm, that we had a couple years ago that knocked out our water system, or, a major fire event or a major chemical spill event, we have people all throughout the city that are trained on the incident management team process so that we can respond to those effectively and serve our citizens in times of need. So, we're always have folks coming and going, so we're always training on that. And this all hazards incident management team has been one of the best courses that we've put our folks through. So this is to bring that course here so that we can put as many folks through that as possible so that we're ready. We work as a team. We've been through exercises and planning. So when there is a major incident, we're not fumbling around trying to figure out what to do. We all have our roles and we all know how to react no matter what the hazard is. So that's, we're looking at safe community and looking at our priorities to make sure we're meeting those through all these budget supplementals.
So then a couple things. Strong economy and trusted government are also two of our high priorities out of the 6 that we've got. So how do we make sure that we're doing better with that? We've had a Unified Development Code, or UDC, since about 05, 06. It's been amended numerous times. It's a struggle if you're trying to do anything in the community to build or something, because it's a very difficult document to read. It's written in legalese. You almost have to be an attorney, or in fact be an attorney to understand it sometimes. And even our own staff has a hard time going through it because they're not attorneys. They're not architects, and so it's difficult for them. So one of the things to be more business friendly and raise and have a strong economy is we want to make sure that we're business friendly on the front end. If you're a business owner, you need to be able to look something up and say, okay, what am I going to be required to do if I need to add on to my building or do something? You should be able to do that without going and hiring an attorney or an architect just to even $2,000 or $3,000 to understand what you have to do, right? So we want to make it easy for you to make that decision. So we've been looking at an update to our Unified Development Code. This is actually something we set aside. It was in our budget last year because of the budget crisis that we had. We set it aside. We said, let's just move it to the next year. Let's get through this. It's something that we can wait a year, but we feel like we want to do this. This will also include having online portal, online access, online presence as well, so people can do that without having to turn through, tons and tons and tons of pages. The other thing is the 311 call center and communications. Trent, talk a little bit about this, because this is another one. It's kind of like the dispatch, that this is trying to understand where we're going as a city.
Sure. So, as a city, we've got many different places. We take phone calls and inquiries and complaints and issues that need to be addressed. And so, we've got the city hall number, we've got utility billing, we've got public works, we got the police non-emergency line, and just a lot of different places for people to go. And, what I've recognized is that, we don't always do a great job, but when somebody maybe calls one of those numbers when they ought to be calling one of the other numbers. And so, we're either shuffling them around or we're not getting them the information or the answers they need. So this is to look at more of our 311 information type call center to where our customer service is elevated to a new level. It's intentional, it's informed, and we have the tools and the training in place so that when somebody gets a call, they've got the answer to most of the common questions. They're not sending you over somewhere else or call somewhere else. They're able to answer most of the common questions we get. And then if it's something beyond that, something more specialized, they know where it needs to be taken, and we do it very intentionally. We don't just transfer you. We don't just tell you to call over here, that we get you to the right person. And then also that all that information is tracked and logged. And so when somebody calls back in, it comes up and they say, oh, I see you called about this, pothole issue. I can give you an update on where that work order is, and that's planned on, that'll be filled, within, the next couple of days. Just, really kind of raise the bar and the level from a customer service standpoint, so that we serve our citizens well. We're not, people don't feel like they're getting the runaround or, and I think about it from sometimes from a standpoint of, customer service in the world today has really changed, and it's hard to even get a person on the phone when you're calling the cable company or your cell phone company or anything like that. We still pick up the phone, but we can do even better than that. We can have the right answers. We can make sure people get taken care of, that things get followed up. We close the loop on those things, and really raise the bar on to what our citizens expect and deserve. So
Yeah,
this initial phase is to basically put a business plan together for that moving forward.
yeah, and at the end of the day, your city government is a people business. I mean, that's what it is. And who are we dealing with? We're dealing with our citizens. We're dealing with people. So it's people to people. You shouldn't be talking to a machine. You should be able to talk to somebody, be able to get your answers quicker, better, more efficiently. And so this is really trying to help and elevate that and elevate your trust in your local government, okay, and do things with excellence.
We're going to have it where the younger generation can talk to machines too.
There
Mayor.
you go. I'm sure AI will play a part in this. We may have AI answering the phones. So anyway, so when you're talking to somebody, it might be a machine. Who knows? I say that. It's probably going to happen. Supplements on whole community. Some of our parks, you see here, all of these are zeros, okay? So what we're doing here is we're converting many of our part-time people into full-time positions. We think that's going to be a better and meet better needs for our customers that come into our parks and into our facilities. So you can see no impact to the budget here, but it is going to change some of our personnel and how we treat that. All right, I've talked about it. We're going to bring up Lorenzo Wingate. He is our new Director of Public Works and Engineering. He's new to our community. He's new to our city. He's not new to Texas, and he's not new to the Houston area. But we're going to talk a little bit about public works and those types of things, specifically driver of budget, right? I mean, we have our streets and drainage and those types of things on the street working for you, but we have our debt service side. So remember, we have a tax rate right now. It's almost 50-50. About 50% of it goes to your maintenance and operation or general fund. The other 50% goes to debt service to pay for some of these large capital projects. We're going to talk a little bit about that debt service. But before we do, we'll go to the next slide and talk about those programs. Lorenzo, first off, welcome. Welcome to Pearland. Just take a couple of minutes and tell us a little bit about you and your background.
So thank y'all for giving me an opportunity to be within the City of Pearland organization. Excuse me. I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas. Actually a third generation municipal employee. My grandpa worked in municipal government for a long time as a crew leader, guy on the back of the truck. I think he put in about 30 years. My uncle put in another 30 years, and I decided not to get on the back of the truck, but do it a different way and hopefully get into another 30 years.
There you go.
But I started off private sector in the engineering world, left the private sector, went to public sector in Missouri City for 2 years, and left Missouri City as an assistant city engineer and went to the city of LaPorte for 6 years and had roles of city engineer and assistant director of public works before coming over to Pearland as a director of engineering and public works.
What's kind of funny is we took Lorenzo from LaPorte. We also took a deputy city secretary from LaPorte. So I'm at a function, and the mayor of LaPorte comes up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked up, said, all right, yeah, I thought he was going to hit me. And he said, my people just want to know, are you done? And I said, for now. But we welcome Lorenzo over into the Pearland family. So let's talk a little bit. You weren't here for the 2009 program that went to the voters, but you're going to be finishing it up. So give us a snapshot of where we are. You'll see this fill in of what's in progress and what's complete, but we're getting real close to completing the 2019 program.
And so the 2019 program consisted of about 14 projects stretched across the different departments of the city of Pearland. Of those 14 projects, about 75% of those projects are complete, and the other 25% are either wrapping up construction or at some point getting ready to go into design phase. So you'll see those projects. One of them that's on the list that's really getting ready to wrap up is the West Lee project. That one's getting ready to come off real soon. And then the next one that's going to get ready to go to construction actually is the Bailey Road improvements. So we'll see that stuff going on
Yeah, we're gonna
here within the next couple months.
expand that overpass across the railroad tracks there on Bailey. So we've let that contract. We're in the finishing up contract and mobilization and all that kind of stuff. So you should see more dirt flying in that area real soon. So that was the 20 and the importance about the 2019 program is the council and the city promised we want all of these projects either completed and or started within 5 years. Well, it was voted on in May of 2019, so a little over 4 years, and you can see everything is either in progress or completed. And as he said, West Lee is literally, we're doing punch list items. We have Hickory Slough, Willowcrest, probably by the end of the year, we'll be wrapping it up. The biggest one is the Bailey Road. Those types of projects, when you're dealing with the railroad and all of that, just take time. And so the city is fulfilling its promise and obligations to get these started and or completed within 5 years. At the 5-year mark, probably the only thing we'll have left is the Bailey Road, and it'll be under construction. So then we fast forward to the 2023 bond program that we just went to the voters on. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, but as you know, it was driven mainly by drainage and really improving our drainage system, some long-standing drainage problems. We had concrete sidewalks as well as a new roadway with used road. And then we had Fire Station 7 down by Turner High School and the rec center down in that area. But then we had the parks programs, both the soccer complex as well as Independence. And so I want to say this to you because we've been talking about with our staff how we implement those programs. The parks program barely passed. I mean, it was basically 51.5% to 48.5%, right? The other projects, the drainage passed almost 68%. All the other ones were in the 60s and low to mid 60s and above. Really a mandate to be able to go and do those. These didn't have that same mandate. So the council, we need to be wise. We need to listen when something is that close. And so we want to make sure that we're doing things the right way, in the right spirit, and we deliver those projects, but also invite the community in to be a part of that. So we're actually going to have some stakeholder groups, some community groups as we lead that through. I'm also going to state that we are moving one of those projects from debt service on your property tax funds to the Economic Development Corporation. They're going to pick up the Hickory Slough sports complex after the detention is done, and they're going to take on roughly a $17 million project through their resources that won't come to your property taxes, okay? And a lot of that is in response to two things. One, we're listening. We want to make sure that we're listening to those 48.5% that voted no, but we also want to do a better job of dealing with our debt rate, okay, and moving that to property tax. One thing we didn't say about property tax, currently, about sales tax, about 27% of sales tax that comes into the city are paid from people who don't live in our city. About 27% comes in from outside. So I'm not going to say it's free money, but that's money that's coming in. Those people are not paying property taxes, but they're helping you and I defray some of our property tax expense. So that's something that's been happening since the May election, and more to come. So Lorenzo, explain a little bit about where we are with the program, and I know we've let one contract for engineering already.
Right. So the top priority projects in drainage were veterans in Southwest Quadrant, which both of those projects will be kicked off pretty soon. If you're looking at the list holistically, we have about 14 drainage projects on the list. And out of the 14, we have 3 of those projects that'll kick off, whether that's design, all 3 of those will be in design at some point by year's end. Veterans will go to council for approval sometime in September. Same thing with Southwest Quadrant. And I believe it's Ocean Point is a smaller project, so we were able to probably bump that up, and we expect to be able to start work on that project by year's end. And so some of the other projects that we'll likely kick off will be the Hickory Slough Sportsplex project, because that has some timing with another project with the detention component. So that parks component and the detention component, we're trying to work together. So those will be kind of linked up to get kicked off at the same time.
Yeah, and one thing I'm going to make you guys aware of an application we've made for some assistance from Harris County, for example. Hughes Road. Hughes Road is a project that goes from Pearland Parkway. It's the extension of Berry Rose when you're in town. It goes from Pearland Parkway across Clear Creek into Harris County and on into Houston. And so as a result, Precinct 2, Mr. Garcia, Commissioner Garcia, has community grant opportunities, community projects that they will help some of their outlying cities with. So we've made an application for them to help us with that. We're fingers crossed that we'll get that awarded to us, but that would, this $10.7 million for Hughes Road, about $4.9 million would move to Harris County if we're successful in getting that grant. So again, doing what we can to take our dollars further. I'm not going to say that we won't do anything else with that 4.9. We might be able to fast track and do more street repair, maintenance, those types of things, and bring our whole system up better, faster in the interim. So I want to let you know, while we went to the voters for this, our intention is to stretch those dollars as far as we possibly can, or not issue the debt, right? That would be the hope. But we want to lessen the load on our property tax debt as much as we can when we can. All right, let's talk about our enterprise fund. I'm going to bring up Mr. David Sons. So this is actually a new position in our city over the last year. We have a director of utilities. David Sons comes to us from the industry. And what's really kind of driving some of this, our enterprise fund, water, sewer, and garbage, is now an $80 million company within the city. Okay, so this is another driver of what you pay, water and sewer rates. So we're going to have a brief discussion, and if you do have to get up and move around, we're going a little bit long tonight, and I apologize, but this is some really important stuff to walk you through the budget and how we put it together. But the enterprise fund is a separate company, if you will, within the confines of our city budget, right? It's truly running a business and running our water and sewer. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's driving our rates and then what we're expecting to see in rates in the coming future. But before we do that, I want David to introduce himself. I think his lovely bride is here as well. So welcome to the community. Welcome both of you to Pearland. Give us a brief how you got here, David.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And I've actually introduced myself to the majority of the folks here. I've missed a few. I apologize. But for those of no great surprise, I was born and raised right up the street in Temple, Texas. That's where I started my career in the utility industry, working for the city of Temple there. And after about 14 years with the city, I had an opportunity to go to the private sector. I took that opportunity and went to work for what is now Jacobs. If you're probably not familiar with it, it's a huge engineering firm, but I worked for the operations and management portion of Jacobs and did that for 20 plus years. As part of that engagement, they moved me from Temple to New Mexico. And that's where I've spent the last 20 plus years.
So it's your fault. You brought all of that dry air here.
Well, I apologize if that were the case. But nonetheless, I am so happy. Despite the heat that we've been experiencing, I am so happy to be back home. I truly feel like I am back home. I'm just 2 hours from family. Or is it 3? 3 hours from family, which is just close enough to stay engaged, but far enough where we're not in each other's business all the time. So I've got a daughter and a grandson, a son-in-law, a mom, a dad, a father-in-law, just right up the streets. My wife has a brother, sister, both in Texas. So we're really, really excited to be back. And Mayor, you don't know this, and I don't think Trent does either. But when we came here for my first interview in April of this year, we came on site for our first interview, and we were staying at the Hilton Garden Inn out on Reflection, right off of Reflection Bay right off of
Shadow Creek.
Shadow Creek,
Mm-hmm.
right off of Shadow Creek. And so we were following a navigation coming down Sam Houston Tollway and took a right on Kirby. When we took that right onto Kirby and headed towards the hotel, my wife and I looked at each other and said, we're home. So when you talk about an impression that your front door makes on your visitors, that was truly impacting to us. And I just thought I'd share that with you. Right, I know I hit you kind of blindsided, because that was a municipal management district, Lower Kirby, is that correct?
Right.
That maintains that area, and it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
My wife said, we're home.
Yeah. You knew you were in a special place, and
Yes.
that's what we want. So, David, as we move through this, what's probably the biggest driver of our water and sewer rate? Now, you've got up here, what's the difference between the two? Before we go there, what's really the difference between the two? So people often say, well, my property taxes are paying for all this water, just do this and do that, or it's paying for this water and sewer line, do all those kind of things. So you can see our general fund, source of revenue, what it really supports, the general government, public works, fire and police, parks and recreation, community development, and our debt service on this side. And then we have this enterprise fund. This is where water, sewer, and garbage comes through. And what's our revenue? Water, water treatment, and debt service are some of the most things that it supports. So there's a line between these two. We do make some transfers between the two. For example, these two gentlemen, especially Lorenzo, he Director of Public Works and Engineering. He's going to have some time over in enterprise that his time gets allocated to. City manager and others, there's time that they do that. There's time where HR and all of those general government type operations, they have time in the enterprise fund with employees and those types of things. So there are some transfers there, but it's really a net cash business. We're not looking to make a profit off of water. We're trying to bring safe drinking, potable water to you. So this is a little bit about our rate history. If you had the opportunity to see my State of the City back in February, either come or watch it online. I went in depth about our water and sewer, what's driving it. You can see that if you go all the way back to 2007 and applied a straight line, you would see about a 6.2% increase in water across the line. But you'll also see 7 years of zeros all the way across that. So you see these big spikes across the way. Had we had a better foresight, and I'm not going to say anything about councils in the past or anything of that nature, but we knew some of these big projects were sitting out here. It probably would have been better, and we have to learn from our lessons, right? We have to learn lessons learned from our past mistakes. Had we just applied a 3% each year across the way and banked that somehow and had more cash and less debt and be able to do some of these projects, we wouldn't see these big spikes. This 13.1 that we're in the current year, this last year that we hit the rate increase, would have been 13.1. I think I've run this number. I think it's below 10. It'd be in the 8% range. We still have an increase, but we wouldn't have the spikes. Take the spikes out of it. It's the spikes that we get the phone calls from. So, what's driving our rate? David, explain JHEC and where is it?
Well, it's a great example. And the biggest drivers that make water and wastewater services expensive are aging infrastructure. We had lots of investment by the countrywide, nationwide. We had a great investment some 60 years ago, and not the best maintenance programs and processes in place over those 60 years. And we're paying for that now. This is JHEC. It's a wastewater reclamation or a water reclamation facility, AKA wastewater treatment plant, back in my day, sewer plant. So this is being completely reconstructed and upgraded to a modern treatment process that will bring the city back into compliance. This is a very expensive project. 75 million just for this one plant alone. Well, that's debt that we now have. So the aging infrastructure has forced the city to take on debt to get into compliance with regulations, and that's the other driving factor. We have federal regulations and state regulations that we have to meet. They're not optional. You either meet those regulations or you pay fines. And it's not that we're trying to avoid fines. We want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And so that is exactly what's going on here. I feel very fortunate that I inherited a system under the leadership of the current governing body and city administration that has recognized this need and taken steps, positive steps, towards correcting the deficiencies of the past.
So this project is actually catching up with growth. Growth put us in that situation, so we had to catch up with this growth. Good news on this, the debt, we did this through the Texas Water Development Board. I'm going to get this wrong, but Tony's going to know the number exactly. I want to say it's around 0.5% or 0.6, somewhere in that ballpark. Thank goodness we did it when we did, not now, as interest rates go up. But nonetheless, the principal has to be paid back. So that's part of your water and sewer rates. And then we've got this one, surface water treatment plant.
This is the crown jewel. This is to me, and what I have found, another thing so impressive is that the leadership and governing body of the city of Pearland has invested in a diverse portfolio of water sources. We don't have just a well field delivering groundwater from wells, deep water wells. We don't have just surface water resource from the Trinity River Basin. We will soon have also our own surface water treatment plant taking water from the Brazos River Basin. So we'll have 3 disparate sources of water available to this community when this plant goes online. We already have the Trinity that we buy wholesale, wheeled through the city of Houston to us from the different
Southeast water plant.
Right. And we've got our wells that have been here forever, or for a great deal of time, and we'll have the surface water plant pulling water from the Americas Canal, which is fed by the Brazos River Basin.
So this all-in plant is $175 million. So 175, that's $250 million. I mean, you can do the math, but that's real quick. We're adding up to real big money. But this will be.
And this is growth driving this.
This is growth that's been driving this, and it's a strategic reason to be diversified in our water. How many of you have noticed, boiled water notices out of the city of Houston? Well, if we're getting water from the city of Houston, we get caught up in that. So if we're able to have some resiliency and move some of our water resources around, we're not as affected by that. We may still be affected, but we're not as affected by that. One of the goals is for us to be as self-sufficient as we can. I do get asked this. I'm going to answer this question real quick. People want to know, does this allow us to cut off water, not get any water from the city of Houston? The answer is no. We're still going to be able to buy water from the city of Houston. We're an actual plant owner in the Southeast Water Plant over in Houston. So we're actually a part owner in that plant. We bought into that plant at 10 million gallons a day for $40 million. This is 10 million gallons a day at 175. So that water is going to still come to us even cheaper than what we do here. But this is on this other end of town. The other 10 million is on the opposite end of town. And so again, it's just giving us different resources for water for our future. So we're not as dependent on a single source. We have multiple sources of water. David, hope, fingers crossed, when do we think we'll push water through the system? And again, we get caught up into everything, supply chain and everything else that everybody else does.
Well, current plan is that we will be testing, doing a thorough testing of the equipment start to finish, cradle to grave on the water treatment process. Now, that does not mean that we can introduce that water into the distribution system because it has to go through lots of testing and lots of background studies, and we have to get clearance from the TCEQ. So we'll be beginning that process very soon. We've got equipment in place, and we're just about ready to go. And Mayor, we hope to have water produced from this plant going to the distribution system for your Christmas present.
I'm not going to hold you to that, but fingers crossed. Let's have a Merry Christmas, and we can have some of the water coming out of the Brazos flowing into our homes coming up soon, very, very soon. Real quick, I'll bring, well, let's have David, or Trent, why don't you come up a little bit as well? Since we had everybody together, we wanted to make sure that we talk about this. It's in the news, right? Walk outside, it's about 1,000,000 degrees. You got cracks in your yard, the whole thing. Drought. Obviously, we're in a drought. I get asked all the time, what are we doing about drought? Drought contingency, where are we? Do we have enough water to do what we're doing? So again, this is a QR code as well. You can go to this QR code. We have a drought contingency plan on the website. You can watch it. You can see it. You can see all of our rules and what it is right there for you to get the download on what we're doing. But Trent, explain a little bit about where we are in our drought contingency plan and what we may be experiencing over the coming week.
Sure. So I believe we're probably about 2-3 weeks into, we enacted stage 1 of our drought contingency plan. So we monitor the system and how much of the capacity of the system we're using daily. We got Julian Kelly with us. Raise your hand, Julian. He's our water production superintendent. So him and his team are watching this daily. They are operating the system to its optimum capacity and making sure we do have water supplied for everyone. But as the drought, continued on, we started to see the usage tick up and up and up into a point where we enacted stage 1 of our drought contingency plan. So stage 1 is voluntary. We ask people to limit watering during the day and that they do their watering at night between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. And they limit that to the days that they have garbage service, so 2 times a week. It is voluntary, so we do see some compliance with that, and we do see a little bit of moderation, but as the drought has continued to drag on, we've continued to see usage to move up. We did, hopefully you got a little bit of rain yesterday. I know a few spots did, and a few spots got a decent rain yesterday. That by no means ends the drought. I think some areas got a fair amount of help, that'll last a short period of time, because I think the forecast this weekend's about 106. Ridiculous. So we continue to monitor that. We did see a drop in usage just based on that short bit of rain. So while we thought we may be going to drought contingency plan phase 2 this week, we've been able to push that off, and we're going to continue to monitor that. Stage 2 is when we get into mandatory water restrictions. So very much similar to the voluntary. It's water only at night, only water the 2 nights a week that you have garbage service, but then it's mandatory. And there, we don't want to do this. We want to talk to people and ask them if we see them using water to stop using water. But if we do have repeat offenders, we do have enforcement mechanisms. But Julian and his team, David leading that group, they're doing everything they can with the system, moderating some of the ways we're operating to ensure that, we push that off as far as we can. But if we continue to see the drought extend through the rest of this month and on into September, we will likely see, stage 2. If we get another 10 days in, we're seeing a little bit of rain in the forecast, more regular. If that comes to fruition, then we hope to stay in stage 1 and get into this fall and some cooler weather. But our system's in great shape. Julie and his team do a great job operating that system and maintaining it. And so, we're in great shape. It's just as the drought continues on and people want to keep their yards alive, and we understand that, it takes a lot of water. So we'll continue to monitor and let folks know if any changes come up.
I'm going to brag on Julian real quick. He didn't know I was going to do this. I didn't know he was going to be here, so I'm going to brag on him. How many of you were here for the winter storm in February, year and a half ago? Right. Remember how we had to go water pressure? We lost water pressure, and it really took it down. The guy that got us back up and the plan to get us back up was Julian. He devised the plan to get it done. We listened to him, said, go do it. And we got back up and running sooner than we would have. And so, yeah. And that's the heart of what you have. And so when we talk about first responders, we have guys that work for Public Works They don't necessarily ride around in a big shiny truck with lights and sirens flying, but they're first responders. They're on the front lines. A lot of these guys during the middle of that storm, they slept on a concrete slab in a plant for 4 nights. So imagine that. That's what they did. It's what they do. They sign up for it and they do it. So we owe them, just like our police officers and our firefighters. We have a lot of water main breaks right now. They get called out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Imagine going into a hole to fix a water line break at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's what they're doing. They're first line responders. They're first responders. We treat them as first responders. At least anytime I talk about it, these guys are part of the first responders, and you can see the heart and mind and the soul behind them as they do this. We're going to bring up Q&A. We do have some questions that was asked online. I don't know if those people were here. We did ask people to submit questions because they may not be here. And so we want to be able to answer those questions. We'll get to some questions here, as well as we'll be around for any and all questions. We are running behind, and I apologize for that. This is a meaty subject. It's hard to deliver in an hour. But first question, AMI, fully functional. This is our smart meters, our water meters, those kind of things, and what's been taking so long. So you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll take that one. So it has taken a long time.
The guys at Itron
Sure.
are glad you're taking it.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be brief because it is the full answer is long. But maybe I'll start with what is done. The new meters are in the ground. The smart meters are in the ground. We're still working on some of the communications network. So a big part of those meters are tied in with the communications network. They are working, but we've still got a portion of the system that we're working through getting them on the communications network. So what does that mean? Once we have them all on there, what that means is we no longer have to go out and drive by or drive around and do meter readings. What it also does is it provides a lot more data for the customers. So once we have everything up and running, we're going to roll out a new water portal so that much like if you've got an app on your phone for your electrical service, and you can set triggers on there that says if I use more than this much electricity in a particular day, or use this much at some point during the month, I want to get a text message or I want to get an email that alerts me to that. It'll be very much the same, but with your water meter. So we expect within the next 2 to 3 months that we've got the bulk of the communication system up. And then once we get through full testing of that, we'll start to roll out the Water Smart portal for the customers. So end of this year, early next year, we expect everything to be completed with that system.
Kind of the good news on that, real quick, the good news is some of the technology has actually changed in the midst of this project. So we now have cellular endpoints on some of our meters, whereas before we didn't have any of that built into it. So we're actually, and with Itron, are actually improving the system. Itron is the contractor that's doing it. We've actually improved the system. And I will say this, I've had 2 meetings with Itron. They've made commitments to making this right and getting it right. I made a comment to them, we're not paying any more bills. You're paying for all this. They're into liquidated damages. They're probably into liquidated damages $400,000 or $500,000.
Several $100,000, yes.
And the last meeting we had, they've already committed and they already have into it above and beyond on their own is $2.5 million to make the system right. So they're doing that to make sure that it's right. They know they missed the mark on their bid. They missed the mark in the whole cellular, the tower and the infrastructure. But they've been along the way and will compete. We want them. We don't want them to walk away so close. They are committed to finishing it. And as Trent said, right here towards the end of the year, we should be hopefully wrapping that up. Can you provide an update on the Clear Creek Master Trail plan's current status? And when can we anticipate further progress and its eventual completion? We'll answer that one before we go to the last
Take that one?
Yeah.
So Clear Creek Trail Master Plan is a plan to, along Clear Creek, have a trail system that basically from the west end of our town all the way to the east end. I didn't use the wrong word. portions of that are outside our jurisdiction, but we're working with Harris County and the adjoining jurisdictions to work on some of those. So maybe I'll start with what is completed. So, west of 288, we basically have a trail system from almost 288, the Modern Green park that's there just north of Clear Creek and kind of behind the retail there. We've got a trail system that extends from there all the way over to our Shadow Creek Sportsplex. So we've got a great trail system along there. It's got portions that are coming down are going to tie in with the trail system throughout Shadow Creek Ranch. So really a robust trail system on that end of town. So from that standpoint, we're looking to come under 288 and start extending east of 288 along Clear Creek, and tying some of that into Tom Bass Park and Adair Park there on Cullen. So we're working with Harris County on some of those portions, but no funding identified and no real schedule on that piece of it. So coming over east end along Pearland Parkway, we've completed one segment of the trail there. That's basically from Hughes Road down to 518. There's a connection to 518. So that was a project that we were able to get some federal funding, pay for about 80% of that. And then the next phase is another project where we have 80% federal funding that'll take it north from Hughes Road up to the U of H Clear Lake Pearland campus on Pearland Parkway. So that project is in design. We're getting well along in the design, and within the next year we should have that bid out and under construction to get that next phase. So beyond that, we're working with Harris County to go west. We're looking to work with Precinct 1 to carry that east over to the boundary with Friendswood, so that we'll eventually have that full connection across there. So I think it's 25 miles or so total. We've probably got about 10 to 13 of that, somewhere between completed and funded.
Close to half completed. If funding is a concern, would the city consider an alternative or temporary solution such as a natural surface or the trail? Really, I'll say this, and we can talk a little bit about it, but if we go to a natural surface, the underground infrastructure and everything else associated with it, the surface itself is a small portion of the cost at the end of the day. So the surface, whether it's concrete, asphalt, or crushed granite, is a small portion of the overall expense. So if we're going to change the surface, it's not going to make enough to make a difference to speed this up. Secondly, if we go with a different, like a crushed granite, the maintenance on that is exorbitant. It washes out, moves, gets dug up. It's not a concrete sidewalk. It's not a concrete trail. So long-term concrete is a much better surface than a natural trail. It might be harder on your legs or your walking, but it's a better surface long-term from a maintenance standpoint. You want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it, Mayor.
All right. What can be done to fix the two big bumps on McKiowa and 518? And I think the poster to this means 518 and McCard, the new road. I always tell people that's our attraction. That's our roller coaster. Need to charge a fee to go over it. You can go back a little bit further and go even harder. No, I'm kidding. It is two big bumps there. I know we have a McKiowa project that's going to be a part of it, but Trent, I know we've talked about this and how thought about some fixes to this and when.
Sure. So there's a couple things there. It's the intersection itself, which I think we evaluate it once we fix the kind of the second thing that's going on there. The bigger thing that's going on there, as soon as you cross the intersection, the old part of McCard, just east of the intersection with McKiowa, it developed a pretty significant dip right there. So we've actually got Mr. Eric Hammond with us tonight. He's our Assistant Director in Public Works. And so his team has evaluated that, and they're working through the process to get a contractor on board. One of the things we do when we see dips in roads like that, or we see a sinking of a portion of a road, we can come in there and it's called mud jacking. You can use different materials, and you can use urethane materials that are a little more permanent, but you come in and you basically pump material in underneath the road to bring that elevation back up and get that dip out of the road. So we've, the first thing when you have something like that happen, you have to look at your underground infrastructure. Do I have a storm sewer that's got a hole in it that's where your dirt's going? Do I have something with my sanitary sewer that's causing me to lose soil there. So the first thing we do is go out and check that underground infrastructure, see if there's any underlying causes. They've checked that. Now they're getting the contractor on board to come out and eliminate that hump. So I think we get that hump eliminated, and then we'll evaluate really kind of the hump in Makawa itself. Because driving it, I don't know that it's any different than crossing most of the intersections there, where there is for drainage, there is a high point in the road, in the middle of the road there. But, if still an issue, we'll look to address that, either in the Makawa project or sometime before that if it needs it.
So since we're talking about Makawa, brief, what's our time schedule on the redo of Makawa upgrade?
Now you got me stumped. So Lorenzo is telling me
26?
26. So we're in design. I believe we have gotten, or we're very, very close to environmental approval. We have that project with 80% federal funds to help us build that project. And so when you go through that federal process, you have to go through the environmental approval as you start your design. And it's not until you have that environmental approval in hand that you can actually go start buying the right-of-way. So obviously we've got a lot of right-of-way to buy through that corridor to widen it. So that process will take, 12 months plus. And then we'll go through, finishing up the design while we're doing that. And then once you have all the right-of-way bought, you've got all the center point overhead lines, Comcast, Verizon, all the lines hanging on all the telephone poles have to be relocated. So that's a very lengthy process to work with CenterPoint and all those other entities to move all those franchise utilities. So that adds another year or so onto the project. And then at that point, we're able to bid the project out and go into construction. And that's probably about a 2-year construction period.
Right. So it's coming. Next, what can be done to fix Hill House and Hawk roads? I'm going to take this one. This is good news. With our superintendent of
Get the easy one.
Get the easy one. We have a program with Brazoria County that we're probably gone back 30 years. It's part of our own road and bridge monies that we pay in for our cars and our licenses every single year. So some of those dollars come back into the city every year. We have a partnership with the county. We identify certain roads throughout our city that are asphalt roads that need to be rebuilt, resurfaced, reconditioned. We do that on an annual basis. The good news is Hill House and Hawk are both in this year's allocation with Brazoria County. We should be cranking that up in September, Eric. We will be working through. We're also very sensitive with both Hill House and Hawk because they're right around, especially Hawk Road is right there next to Dawson High School. So we want to be very cognizant of student drivers, big equipment, those types of things. It may be that Hawk gets delayed until we're into the a little bit closer to fall break or Thanksgiving break, so we can do that and lessen the student interaction with some of these the trucks and the construction that's going on. But that's on the schedule for this year. Next, what are the plans for FM 518 or Broadway upgrades as it pertains to bikeways along FM 518, including safe walking lanes? We've talked about the expansion of 518 to a 6-lane thoroughfare from 288 all the way back to where Walnut and the split off there is. The limits of the quote project go to 35, but the actual construction will end there. It's in 2 phases, 288 just through Cullen, get that intersection done, and then from that point back to Walnut at another date. The first part of that section has been funded. It's in final design. Engineers are working on that right now. The second phase, I believe, is in design work. Yes. Looks like will be funded shortly, and it'll probably just end up being an extension of this project as it moves on. That project has upgrades to a 10-foot shared use path on one side of the road, so both bikes and people can safely walk and bike together, as opposed to a smaller one. And I think does it have a 5-foot on the other side?
It's got a 5-foot sidewalk on the other side.
And 5 foot on the other side. So our constraints there have been right-of-way and the conflicts with businesses, parking, and those types of things, and making sure that we don't hurt a lot of business owners and property owners in the process. But the first phase of that looks to be starting up construction probably in 25. So right around the corner, actually. So before we bring up this, questions from the floor. Anybody here have a question for, yes, ma'am? Right. Trail, so the trails have trees, right, walkable.
You take that?
Yeah.
Sure. So, we have a trails master plan and we have a multimodal plan and parks master plan, and that's been identified as an issue, obviously, as we look at those things. And so what are we doing about that? I actually have an answer for what came up Monday night for council that I didn't have an answer for. So we've got a tree trust fund. So, there's a process of mitigating for trees if a development occurs and they clear cut a site that's got lots of old growth or nice trees on it. There's a process for mitigating for that. So, part of that is monetary. So we have what's called the tree trust fund. And one of the things we're allocating funds for in our FY24 budget is to look at some of the parts of the trail system where we don't have any trees, and to start developing that tree canopy over time along the trail system, so that there is some more shade as it takes many years, obviously, and we got to start somewhere. But we're going to start on that moving forward. And then, we also look at where some of the trails are. There's some segments of it over on west of 288 along the Clear Creek Trail there, where we were able to preserve a significant amount of the existing canopy and existing growth, so it does provide a lot of shade. But those other areas where we're working along a drainage way, the drainage districts like everything clean and clear so they can maintain the drainage way. So there's just not a whole lot of shade on those. So we've got to work with them as well to where we put trees and be selective so it doesn't impact their maintenance of the drainage facilities as well. So, we got to keep our drainage ways and working as well also. So
Yeah, real
that's kind of
quick,
long-term
and
plan.
For those that are watching online and you see this, the question, and I meant to restate the question so they can hear to have it. Basically, the question was, we have our trails and our trail plan with this drought and the heat and those types of things. A lot of that trail is out in the open. And I know, for maintenance and those types of things, but what are we doing to introduce, the tree canopy around those trails? And so that's really where the basis of that question was. And I will say, I think we have roughly a $1.1 million that's in the tree trust fund now. So we're looking to offset some of that and put it into those trail systems this year. That's deeper into our budget. If you go line item by line item, you'll see $400,000, I think, is the number-ish that is going to be put into those types of trees this year. Yes, sir.
Since the budget had to be reworked because of the shortfall, what major improvement was set back to the future?
A lot of it was
The biggest.
the biggest. Well, I would say probably one of the biggest things that we did in that budget shortfall, and it really, we deferred not paying into our motor pool fund. So, for example, we have, I don't know how many vehicles, quite a few, and they have to be replaced periodically. So we make, quote, lease payments into that motor pool fund on an annual basis so we can pay cash. If you're at home and you want to buy a car and you want to figure out how you pay for one in cash, what do? You take out a 4-year or a 5-year note, you pay it off, you want to keep that car, you pay for the next 4 or 5 years the same payment. Theory is 4 or 5 years down the road, you have enough cash to buy a new car, a new vehicle, whatever, with cash. Motor pool fund works very similar to that. So you have the vehicle. So what we did, probably one of the biggest line items in the budget is we deferred that payment.
You didn't set anything.
Correct.
You're
Well,
not delaying any capital improvement.
no, not delaying the capital improvement. The question was, with the budget shortfall, the budget issue that we had last year, what was the biggest expense item that we either delayed or pushed out into the future? Okay, and probably the biggest single line item would have been the motor pool fund. There was a lot of little things that we did. We were so far down into moving forward with capital projects and those types of things, we haven't delayed because it really didn't have any impact on this budget. We really looked at stuff for what we had an impact on this budget. If we delayed something, that didn't have an impact on this budget. So the biggest expense was probably the motor pool fund, which we're restoring this year because we still have wear and tear on those vehicles, and we'll still have to replace them. Yes, ma'am. And thank you for using West End. I know. The question was, we have the Knapp Senior Center over on Grand, and as it's growing, we have a growing population of seniors. Is there any consideration of having a second location on the west end as opposed to just having the one on the east end? It's a great question. I know we have some plans to expand and do some things at the Knapp Center, and that.
Sure. So we do have some funds through our community development block grant funds that come through the federal government to be able to expand at the Knapp Center itself a little bit. But we know that's kind of a stopgap, and we know we have a linear east to west community. So I think that's one of the things we've got to look at the next few years. So our Parks Department runs that. So our Parks Director, Carrie Capers, and I, we've had some discussions about do we have the opportunities to expand the Knapp Center further? Do we expand our programming into a facility like this? So we've got programming on both sides of the town. And I'm going to get into an area where I'm not going to have all the facts, but I do know we have run some programs out of this facility in the past. And so it's looking at, do we have the personnel? Do we have the staff? Because, you start running out of two different facilities and it takes additional staff and those sort of things. But really kind of coming up with a longer term plan for our community so that we can have those conversations with the city council for, how do we serve that senior population for the long term across the entire community. So there's not a fully baked plan at this point, but we are having those conversations and starting to think about, the long term of how we do that.
Good question, though. Yes, ma'am. Oh, the detention?
Okay.
I think it's the detention fund
Yeah,
project.
yeah,
Right.
I think so.
That's the EDC?
Yes.
Yeah. So our Economic Development Corporation has a project with, are we allowed to say who owns that land?
Sure, I think it's common knowledge.
Okay.
It's the property.
Well,
yeah, the adjacent
well, no,
property.
I mean, it's going out on YouTube forevermore. So I want to make sure that I don't speak out of turn with all the different, agreements that we have. But Buc-ee's owns the land north of J.C. Penney's to eventually build their home office here. Okay, and currently, most people don't know this, but their headquarters is in Pearland. It's not in Lake Jackson. They only have about 3 employees in Lake Jackson, but their headquarters is here. They run it out of lease space in the town center. There's 200 plus people in the town center. And they have a huge growth plan, and every time they open a store somewhere, they need about 10 or 12 people in their home office to support that. So they're looking at eventually building a space here. So part of that is there's going to be some right-of-way and a road built, across over to the frontage road, in addition to some extending and improving that drainage component that's over there. So there's a deal between us and Buc-ee's and the Economic Development Corporation to do that. Well, and eventually, hopefully, a nice office building with lots of people paying sales tax and those types of things right here locally as well, building our tax base. And jobs, that's right. More jobs. Any other questions? I thank you for those opportunities to answer those. We will be around for one-on-one questions as well. I would like to bring my 2 council members up real quick. We are going long, and I apologize for that. Usually we like to get in and out on these. But like I said, this is a little different subject to hit and get all the way through in an hour. Again, we have one of our seasoned guys that's been around for a few years in Tony Carbone, great guy. He was my mayor pro tem this last year. Position 2?
two. I bounce around.
Yeah, two. I never remember those kind of things. But we're going to talk a little bit about, this all starts with priorities from the council. And the council's listening to the people. What do we want to see in our budget? What do we want to see as our city? Who are we? What are our, and so resilient finances was one of the biggest ones that we need to have. Providing long-term community value through trusted stewardship and responsible financial management. And I'll say this, we took a gut punch last year. Finding that error and having that and to go through that. Let me tell you, it hurt. Just imagine getting hit in the gut and what that does to you. And we were able to withstand that, okay? I'm not going to say it didn't knock us, back a little bit. It did. But resilient finances put us into the position that we were able to weather that. Could we do it again this year? Probably not. It'd be tough. It'd be tough. But that's what resilient finances do. We're on the Gulf Coast. We could have a storm. We could have something that hits us that we have to have long-term recovery and funds and operations to come through. So it's important that we have resilient finances. But I'm going to ask both of you guys, guy that's been around for a few years that helped drive some of this, what does resilient finances mean to you? And then we're going to go to the newbie and ask the same question.
Yeah. Yep. You can say ditto.
Yep.
No, but resilient finances to me, it's the backbone of all the other priorities. Because like it or not, it takes money to make anything happen. And so, and it helps. I'm a CPA, so I like numbers, and you'll make up some time having us up here. But no, it's being able to weather the foreseen and unforeseen storms, and in the slide it says through trusted stewardship, and I think a big piece of that is the transparency and that link that they showed earlier. You can watch when it's all said and done. 20 hours of meetings, put you to sleep. But what I love is everything that we see as councilmen is there on the website. There's probably 800 to 1,000 pages of backup. There's the raw data in the budget. So I'd venture to say there's nothing that we see that is not completely open and transparent. And I think that goes a long way. I'll leave the rest to you, Rush.
Same question. And so Rushi Patel was elected in May of this year. I like to say this. I've said this a couple times in his presence. You're part of living history. Rushi was the first Indo-American elected to the Pearland City Council. I talked about being a diverse community, diverse backgrounds, cultures, and Rushi is bringing a diverse component to our council. Very welcome. Rushi's been around for a few years. I'd say 20, 22 years, something like that in the Pearland area. Before answering this question, just brief about who you are and your background.
So thank you for having me, Mayor, and thank you for coming today. My background is I moved to Houston or Texas in 2001. My background, again, is CPA, so I get along with Tony really well. I grew up in South Carolina and decided to move here. So I got two girls, and I live in Southern Trails, so I live on the west end of town.
One council member at a time.
Mine and Tony's values are probably very similar, and I think we get along really well. We're very financially conservative, and I think we're very careful of every dollar we get. It is hard sometimes to grasp coming from the business side, the government sector. It is very different. But I think, the 7 council members, including me and the mayor, I think our goal is all the same, but we just have a different route to get there. That's the difference. And for me, what I did like to see, I wasn't on city council till May, but what was interesting, even though we had a $10 million hit, we were able to take it. That tells you just alone, I always compare my business. I want to have enough money to survive. If I go from $100 million to zero, I should be able to survive for 6 months, right? They tell you to put your mortgage for 6 months aside. And we do that. And I think that's fantastic. And so I know we have a very fresh finance department, which I'm learning, but they're really dedicated. And I give them a lot of kudos for the budget they have this year. I did follow the budget last year and I follow it this year. And I'll tell you, if you compare the two, you'll see it is a lot more transparent. And to be honest, which has been disappointing to me, is not one person, I believe, Mayor, has come to our budget meetings in a public hearing, which is kind of scary. It's your tax dollars. So I ask you to please come and give us your opinion. Otherwise, you got to learn to live with the decisions we make.
That's a good point. When I served on council years ago, I had people saying, "What's some of the hardest things you've had to do?" And you go through a budget time period, and not a single person spoke yay or nay on a budget. And here you are voting on, every single year we pass the largest budget in our history, right? Because we're a growing community, things change. Here we are, and you're voting on a budget, and you haven't heard from anybody. That's hard. So we got to make sure that we have our values aligned. I think across the board, when you look at 7 council members plus myself, I think you have very aligned values when it comes to fiscal policy, when it comes to growth, when it comes to policing, safe community, public works, and all those kind of things. I think our values will align. We might have a vote here or there where there's a lone outlier that says no, but for the most part, you have a connected council that's moving through this, and it means a lot that we get together, and these guys will dedicate a Saturday in February. This is when the budget season starts. It's in February. It culminates in September with a new budget. It starts in February when we get together and say, what are our priorities? And it starts with last year's priorities, moving them forward. Now what we've got to do with these priorities is put milestones, making sure that we're moving in the same direction. I don't know if you did this as a kid, but you always, when you were driving with your parents somewhere out of town, you had mile markers. You had places that you passed. You knew how long it was going to take you to get from point A to point B. And you knew it because, I just passed this Dairy Queen in such and such town, or I just passed this community, or I just passed that. You knew where you were along the way. And the milestones that we want to add to this is marking that off. So we move the direction, and we're moving in our community in a certain direction. And so we can get there very strategically. We just don't happen upon it, but we have a very deliberate roadmap to get there. It might be delayed from time to time. Last year, we had to delay some things. That's life. But we have a plan to get from point A to point B. And that's what this is designed to be. I hope we delivered on that tonight. Stay tuned with our budget process over the next 5 weeks. As Member Patel said, come to council, show up, be there, watch the discussion. If not, you can see it all online. And if you are having a hard time, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, watch it. It might put you to sleep. It is dry, it's numbers, but it is a good discussion about our community. So with that, I want to thank every single person that showed up here, anybody that was online. Again, another QR code if you want to give some feedback about how this went tonight. This is what this QR code is for. Give us your feedback. We do this quarterly. Wait for the next one. We're hoping, we have one in November scheduled at one of our businesses up off of Lower Kirby. But then in the first quarter, if David's correct, I want to do it at the surface water treatment plant, invite people out and see that beautiful shiny toy. We want to shine it. You're paying for it, so we want to show it to you. And give tours and those kind of things through the plant. So thank you again for tonight. I do apologize for going a little long tonight, but as you can see, good subject matter. Thank you, folks.